Hello there, my name is Dries, and I'm working on this model right now, and I've been working on it. I've been blocking it out and working on it using Dynamesh now for a while, and I'm ready to move on to working topology. And I could use ZRemesh and get something pretty decent, but it might have some issues, and it won't have exactly the flow I want, or the might be too hard to control how much polygon there is and how to control my polygroups and so on. So in this episode, I'm going to show you how I retopologize the body to make my working topology. Okay, so I'm jumping inside of 3ds Max. This is not 3ds Max specific. It's more about the way you make the polygons flow. So you can do this in any 3D package you have access to. You can do it in Blender, Maya. You could even do it inside of Zbrush. It's just that I'm more comfortable using 3ds Max. So this is what I'm going to be using because it's actually the way I do it. So what we're going to do is we are going to box model our new topology on top of our existing model. So if you have access to something that allows you to snap the vertices to your model, you want to be using this. Inside of 3ds Max it's polydraw, but you can do the same thing inside of Blender. You can just snap to surface or faces, and you can do the exact same thing. So what I want to do is I want to create a box. Here I'm picking my reference surface to be snapped to. I want to pick up the box, and then I'm going to subdivide it once, and that's going to define my waistline. So here I'm just moving everything into position, and from my waistline, the side of the box here is going to define the curve I have here. That is the hip curve. That nice definition we have here. Moving everything into position. What I want to do is place my polygons and shape them in a way that will allow me to add loops and just keep on adding loops later and not keep modeling. So there's going to be a fair bit of modeling. Here I'm using symmetry to have both faces be the same, and this is important. You need to chamfer the middle edge, because when we extrude the leg, we want to have that little gap of polygons between the thighs. So this is why it's important to chamfer that edge. Here I'm defining where I'm going to extrude the arm. Moving everything I've created into position. Symmetry that gives us back our middle axis, our center line. Extruding once, then I'm going to make that the elbow joint connection. So we're just moving everything to be roughly where the elbow is. Then we're going to extrude again, and that's going to be our connection to the hand. Trying to mimic the planes, because the end of my arms and the end of arms usually tend up to be a more box-like shape. So we're trying to find that box-like shape again and make that make our real boxes, because we're so low in polygon. We're going to try to match the planes of the hand. Same thing here. We're going to find the connection point between the knee connection point. Here, the ankle connection point. Then we're going to move everything into position, trying to keep sense of the planes. You don't want to move your when you're so low in resolution, you don't want to move too much on the side. You want to try and keep the flow the same. So the legs are actually pretty skinny right now. They're going to get bigger. So we extrude once, and then we extrude from the front face of the of that box to create the foot. Excuse me. For the feet, I find it hard to go straight to the end of the feet right away. So I'll extrude again, but you could extrude right to the end and then just add a loop to create that shape. But I find it easier to extrude 2 times. It's a little easier for my brain to understand the shape of the feet, and you don't have to go to the tip of the feet. Just you'll add loops later that will fill those missing parts. So extrude a block for the hand. Now we add a loop. Like so, we chamfer the connection to the hand, so the thumb that we are going to extrude now isn't directly connected to the hand. So we extrude it twice. We're going to move that into position, and the double extrusion is important to make it flow, and so that when we just simply add loops later, all those loops are make sense. So the that location is hard to. There's a lot of twisting and turning, and it's hard to make the polygons flow properly. So this is a workaround I found, is that you extrude twice and then you extrude once more from the side, like I just did there for the rest of the thumb. And if you did this maneuver properly, don't hesitate to pause and look how I made those 3 extrusions. You're basically creating an L shape out of the side of the hand, and that will come in handy later when we create all our extra loops to really define our shape. The flows should make sense. The edge loop should make sense. So now I'm adding an extra loop, just going around everything and making sure everything is where it should be. Just adding 1 loop at a time and going over the entire body at this stage is pretty helpful. Here we're trying to aim for the center of the leg, the center of the thigh, the knee. So you want to make sure that your vertices are all in the right spot. Making sure our center line is centered on the x-axis, so that when we do a symmetry, everything is perfectly symmetrical and that the center edge line is not wonky. Depending on the 3D package you're using, you could just work on one side, and that would work. And you can mirror it inside of Maya or inside of a Blender. Here I'm going to add an extra loop inside of the chest, and that way that will allow me to extrude the breast. But now I'm insetting. I picked those few polygons and I'm insetting them in, so that way I can extrude my neck. And I am insetting them so I have an extra edge loop, so that they are not directly connected to the rest of the topology. Moving them into position, they should define the contours of the neck. I don't have to redo the symmetry all the time, it's just that I like to. So here I'm adding that extra loop around the middle of the arm, and I'm going over the entire shape to make sure everything is roughly where it should be. And this should be between your middle finger and your ring finger. Here to speed them up, I have inside of 3ds Max, you have a conform brush that just pushes the vertices along the surface you're conforming to, but you could do the same thing, just move every vertex and make sure they snap to the surface. It's just a little bit faster. Sometimes it doesn't work, so you have to be careful and double check what it's doing, because sometimes it can get out of control. Looking at the shape from every angle. Here I'm adding 2 extra loops to the arms, and that's important because that will give us our reference planes, our reference faces to extrude. See here, the conform brush didn't know how to move the vertices between the thighs, so it's something I'll have to do manually. Not such a big deal because there are so few polygons. So yeah, as I was saying, those 4, the way I've added those loops is important because it's how I'm going to extrude my fingers. Extrude those 2. You can't extrude them all at the same time because you could extrude them by face only, not by group, but I find it easier just to extrude them 2 at a time. So we extrude them, move into position. So, and we're just going to go down the finger, making sure that the edge goes along every knuckle. Now we can pick every face, extrude them all. I'm going to try and move them roughly all into position. So here we're pulling geometry and just making sure that we have an edge loop where all our major landmarks should be. And once we've extruded, and once we've added all these edge loops where they should be, it's just a matter of adding loops and making sure they are where they should. But it should the initial very, very low poly mesh phase is the longest part. Just adding loops and making sure they conform to the surface will speed up quite a lot once we're done. Here I'm adding loops. I try to keep the polygon density roughly the same. So once I start adding loops, I try to add the same amount of loops everywhere, so it's easier to keep track of. So here the conform brush got a little bit confused. So we're making sure everything is clean. Making sure everything is clean every time you add loops at this early stage will make sure that every loop you add later on is working nicely with each other. Going around, making sure everything is roughly where it should be, that it has a nice flow to it. I started using this method because I wanted to have a way to make my working topology, because this is not topology for animation or topology for games or so on and so on. This is working topology, so this is what I would bring back inside of Zbrush and make my final model on. Then I would do my my actual animation or game topology, depending on the purpose of the model. But here my goal is to make a model that is that has the flow that I want. So see, you can see here I'm just adding loops, and they should all make sense since we've constructed the hand in a logical manner. So using this method, the entire body is watertight. So that means that if I, for whatever reason, need to, here I'm just adding loops, trying to make sure that the polygon density is roughly the same, and then just going over and making sure everything is in position. So yeah, if I ever need to Dynamesh, Dynamesh will close every hole you have inside of your model. So and it can lead to some unexpected results if you have very thin surfaces or holes that it closes in a maybe sometimes in an unexpected way. Here I'm just making sure that my loops, I don't want to add too many loops, so I'm making sure that they are evenly spaced. So yes, making sure that my model is watertight makes that if I ever need to Dynamesh, it will already be watertight, so it will avoid creating some unexpected results. And also I tend to my main business model, let's say, is I am mostly focused on 3D printing, so having a watertight model is essential. So it's just a habit. I like to work on watertight models. So here I extruded those 4 faces. It's very important to be using 4 faces for loops, for the loops to make sense. I want to work with quads. I don't want to introduce too many. I don't want to introduce triangles, and yeah, this is why I'm extruding 4 faces, and this is why also the chamfer we did in the beginning is important, because when we extrude the breast shape here, we do not want that extrusion to be connected to we don't want the extrusion for the left breast to be connected to the right breast. In essence, we want to have that spacing. So adding that chamfer in the beginning is very important. Here, going over and making sure that the density is roughly the same. You can see now that the entire model is starting to look like it's supposed to. Going over, making sure I haven't forgotten to move a vertice somewhere. If I was inside of Zbrush, I would project all every once in a while on my new model, adding all these edge loops. I tend to, maybe sometimes I'll add more edge loops to connection points. So I might add extra loops to the areas around the elbows, the shoulders, the knees, and so on. having a look at the model, trying to see where things are missing. Since it's a pretty, here I'm using the relax brush to try and even out my my polygons. It's difficult to avoid stretching, so it's difficult to have perfectly even geometry. It's something you should aim for, but it's something you'll likely won't achieve because simply depending on the model, if it's a pretty simple model, you might be able to pull it off, but when you're starting to have a lot of bulky masses, specifically on this model, it's a pretty buff character, so there are a lot of stretchy parts. So I'm trying to aim for squares. I'm trying to have my polygons be as square as possible, but it's not something I'll be able to achieve. So trying to be as close as possible is what I'm aiming for. But there are some areas like the thigh that it's a pretty big area. There's bound to be some stretching, but it's not too bad. Going over the entire model, trying to make the edge loops be evenly separated. Having a look at the model, trying to make sure I am, because when every time I'm relaxing, I'm shifting the vertices around, so trying to make sure that we are having them evenly distributed is good, but hitting those landmarks is more important to me. Because if I ever need to make some big changes on the first level, being able to move the landmarks is more useful to than having perfectly even geometry. Most computers now can handle millions and millions of polygons, so it's not like I am going to ever be desperate for an even surface. If I'm not having enough detail at one point, at one resolution, I can just subdivide once more. It's not really an issue anymore. Going around, adding those loops. Here I'm using set loop and set loop inside of 3ds Max. It just evens out the surface. I could add more loops, but it's sometimes if you don't need it, it's better to move around the loops you have to even it out than to add more loops. It just becomes more loops for the sake of adding loops. Same here for the back of the back and the back of the shoulder blade. Here I could add a loop, but if I insert a loop here, it's going to add more polygons around the entire model since the way it was built. So it's just better to try and even it out. Here the conform brush didn't know what to do, so we are going to manually snap them into position. Sometimes you can see the vertices snaps to something else. It's because the camera is clipping the model, so the vertice jumps into space. we're in a pretty good spot, just having an extra look around the model. Things should be good enough. We just want to double check. So now the model is pretty even. We have the topology where we want it. The polygons flow more or less like I want it. So it's going to be easy to select the polygons inside of ZBrush. So now, on top of that, I'm going to add some UVs, but it's not working UVs. So I'm not making UVs for texture. I'm making UVs to create polygroups. Then we're going to polygroup by UV. So I don't care how they look or how they are laid out. I just want to create the cuts. So everywhere I pick a cut and I break them inside of the UV editor, I am going to be able to create a polygroup inside of 3ds Max. So here I'm breaking the foot, the shoulders, the arms. I'm probably going to break, I'm going to break the fingers off. Selecting the edge loop automatically didn't work for me. Just going to pick the polygons and just break them and move them into position. Make sure, it's something I forget to do, make sure to pack your UVs once you've done this, so you don't have to unwrap it, you don't have to relax it, because it's not meant to be used, but you could do it. It's something you definitely do if you plan to use, if you're going to pause your model and texture it and 3D print it or something. You could use this. You don't need animation topology. Then you could use this. So you could spend the time and actually make useful topology. But yeah, don't forget to pack your UVs before you jump into ZBrush. Now we're back inside of ZBrush. We imported our model. We're going to snap and turn auto group with UVs, and we're going to try and merge similar, but sometimes it doesn't work exactly like you wish. It wants to merge the fingers together, but I want to keep them as separate polygroups. So I'm just going to regroup everything by hand. Won't take too long. Just hide everything, group visible. The longest part is just to hide the fingers. But yeah, that's going to wrap things up. So using this method, I can have decent topology, control topology, instead of relying on Z-remesher, and I can set up my polygroups. And then once all this is done, I can simply import it inside of ZBrush and project all, and just increase in subdivision, and that way I can get back all the work I've done inside on my Dynamesh and have a new working topology that I can use, that I can easily mask, that I can create polygroups the way I want. And it's a lot faster to create polygroups this way than inside of ZBrush, even though ZBrush is very good at creating polygroups. This just takes a lot less time. So yep, this is going to wrap things up for me. I hope you found this one useful, and I'll see you guys in the next one.